All right, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to the Stop Ecocide panel on Law and Finance in Harmony with Nature. My name is Katie Surma. I'm a journalist at Inside Climate News, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan newsroom that focuses on climate and energy and the environment. I want to thank Stop Ecocide and Jojo specifically for having me here to moderate this event. A few disclosures very quickly before we get started. I am a journalist. I'm here as a journalist. I'm not an advocate. That's not my role. And then secondly, as chance would have it, one of our panelists, Stephen Donziger, I happen to be writing a profile on him. I'm in the midst of it. I didn't know he would be on the panel, and I just thought that was something that I should disclose to our audience. So with that out of the way, we can get started. And first up, we have a pre-recorded message from Lynne Twist. Unfortunately, she couldn't be with us today. She is the co-founder of the Pachamama Alliance, which is a nonprofit organization that partners with indigenous people in Ecuador to support stewardship of the rainforest. She's also the founder of Soul Money Institute, a nonprofit organization that provides educational programs to help individuals and organizations align the allocation of their financial resources with their values. Lynne will come up here on the video.
Hi, I'm Lynne Twist, co-founder of the Pachamama Alliance and president of the Soul Money Institute, and I'm very, very honored to be part of this really important and critical and timely gathering in Stockholm. I wish I could be there because I love Stockholm. Clearly, it's one of the most beautiful cities on earth. But instead, I'm participating this way, and thank you for allowing that. The Pachamama Alliance, the word Pachamama means Mother Earth, and it's an alliance between the indigenous people of the sacred headwaters of the Amazon rainforest and conscious, committed people in the modern world like all of you gathered there today. And our work is for the preservation of life, just like yours is. And we're very, very fortunate to be working with the Achuar, the Shuar, the Shiwiar, the Kofan, the Andoans, the extraordinary indigenous people who have defended fiercely and effectively the sacred headwaters of the Amazon for a very, very long time, for decades, against the largest entities on earth, the oil companies, the mining companies, the timber companies, and the extractive industries. And they've done that through a deep and spiritual power that they draw from their relationship with the natural world. As we all know, indigenous people are the custodians, the best custodians of the forests. They don't live in the forests, they are of the forests. They are part of the forest system. And when indigenous people are threatened or removed, the forests can't thrive without them. And they are the custodians on this planet that know the earth intimately. Their relationship with her is profound. And I know we all look to indigenous people to find our way through this very, very difficult passage with the climate crisis. I also want to thank everybody at Ecocide, Jojo Mehta in particular, for the courage of calling environmental devastation a crime, ecocide. During the years that the Pachamama Alliance has been in existence, one of the things we've done is worked on legal frameworks that have us not treat land and the very earth we stand on as property, but rather as entities, beings that need rights, that deserve rights. In Ecuador, we were part of the indigenous people's mandate to have the rights of nature be placed into the Ecuadorian constitution. It's the first place on earth where rights of nature defendable in court, and it's a fundamental part of that constitution. So I feel very grateful to Jojo and all of you there to be re-looking at the way we see our earth, the way we see each other, the way we see life. Because it's in the paradigm, the mindset that we hold that has us living in destructive ways. So it's my honor to be part of this gathering, to send a message from all the indigenous people of the Amazon that we work with in the sacred headwaters, the most biodiverse rainforest on earth, a place where there's more species practically per hectare than there are in all of North America. And we're very, very grateful to have their wisdom, their partnership, and to support them in their quest to have us make it through this perilous time in history in a way that we sustain life, not just for ourselves, but for all children of all species, for all time. Thank you.
All right. So next up, we're going to hear from Gerrit Peter Bruch. He is a director, journalist, photographer, and author. Did I get, are there more things in the list? He is the founder of Planet Amazon, an organization dedicated to supporting indigenous people and their stewardship of the rainforest. He's also worked very closely with Chief Reoni Mekaturi of the Kayapo people to raise awareness about the need to protect the rainforest. His organization, Planet Amazon, is part of the Alliance of Mother Nature's Guardians, an organization and movement that aims to promote peace, unite indigenous peoples, and protect future generations and all living beings. So, Gerrit, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. It's truly an honor to be here and to be here so quickly, so fastly after being in the Amazon, right in the middle of the Amazon. I was there just a few days ago, and it's very emotional to bring a new message from Chief Reoni, because well, Chief Reoni is a legend, is a living legend. You might remember when he toured with Sting some more than 30 years ago now, and it was crucial in the raising of the consciousness that we really have to all get together to protect the Amazon. And that was a very powerful message. And we hear, like yeah, it was 1989, so 33 years later, and we're still talking about the same issue. And Chief Reoni is bringing a message about ecocide, of course. That's the main point today, but he really wants you to say that, hey, look, we started the work together some 33 years ago, and it's not done. And at the contrary, it's being reversed, and we're losing what we have achieved together. So let's all, you know, unite again and finish the work. And we're mostly talking about demarcating indigenous territories in the Amazon. And so that was very emotional, because we almost lost him. He almost died from COVID, and then his wife died. So he just, you know, he retreated for 2 years, and we didn't know that he would come back. So when I came, he was very animated, and he said, "I'm going to travel again with you, and we're going to meet President Macron and other authorities, and we're going to make it, because you know that it will be election time in Brazil, so it's crucial. Bolsonaro wants to be re-elected. Lula wants to be president in office again, but he gave us an interview some few days ago, and he really said that he wants to achieve what he has started some 30 years ago. So let's see. So I think it's more important is hearing Chief Reoni now, but I'm very confident, and he wants to be involved in you know, making the ecocide crime a reality as well, because let's remind that he was almost at the start. In 2013, he began to be involved with us, Planet Amazon. So when I brought the issue again, he said, of course, we have to do it. So let's hear Chief Reoni.
Ba ara me moya joya ne mana project tuya ya ke jaga me are ka ben ko ka ngo yo te li pe ko bene ke ja me o me yo me au ka ju ke kan ga ngo te be unde mo te ya ne bai ma ke ne me ma ne me ko ka ngo ke ja ga me i pe ko bene ge me ngô mấy yang phiêu mấy bên ngô cái này cả phiêu mẹ bên bà nhá mà ở mẹ mà này mẹ ye cái bên mà này cái bên cô ta ye ý bây cũng bên mà mẹ mà này đó này à.
So it's short, but straight to the point.
Well, I would love to hear more briefly about the time that you've spent working on this project and what it means to you to be doing that work.
It means a lot. I grew up as a French boy, and I was interested, but not more than that. But when I met Chief Raoni, at 18, it changed my life. So I understood that, wow, something very important is happening over there. So it changed everything, and it's very, very important. And nowadays, because it was 30 years ago, so I couldn't imagine that I would be seated here and talk about this issue, in 2022. But still now something very important is happening, because the youngsters that are today, they have 20 years old, they are mobilizing all around the planet, and that's something incredible, because Chief Raoni's message was about them, the generation that would be born after 20,000. So now the work that I'm trying to do with the film that we are doing, I'm working with Princess Esmeralda from Belgium on the new documentary project, and we're going to tour with Chief Raoni, is connecting the indigenous people to the youth movement, and that's very interesting. And it's going to be something powerful. Could you imagine, for instance, just the image of Chief Raoni with Greta, just on a picture? That would be fantastic. So, but it's much more than a picture, and there are some youth from Belgium and other countries. They have traveled to the Amazon. I don't know if you remember that. It was 2 years ago. They wanted to go to Chile for the COP, and then the COP was cancelled. But so they said, no, okay, we stay on our idea. Let's go and meet the people from the Amazon. And they met Chief Raoni, and they met other people, and it changed their lives. So I think that's the most important now, trying to connect all that together.
Yeah, yeah. We should note too, Chief Raoni, with others, has filed a communication with the International Criminal Court against Jair Bolsonaro, the president of Brazil. And they name crimes against humanity as the crime, but he says this is ecocide. Of course, ecocide's not a crime yet at the International Criminal Court, but worth noting. So our next speaker is zooming in specially from the United States, bright and early. Stephen Donziger is a lawyer and activist who is best known for his representation of Ecuadorian indigenous peoples in a 3-decade and running dispute with the oil giants Texaco and then Chevron. Stephen has spent nearly 3 decades litigating with Chevron over pollution in Ecuador's rainforest and related disputes from that. So, Stephen, welcome.
Hi, everyone. My name is Stephen Donziger. I'm an attorney in the United States. I have worked for 28 years on behalf of indigenous peoples in Ecuador in a case against Chevron over massive oil pollution caused by Chevron onto indigenous ancestral lands down in the Amazon rainforest. I want to talk about the Ecocide law a bit and how I believe it could have impacted decades ago the behavior of a major oil company when it took the deliberate step to pollute in order to save money. And just to be clear, this is not any kind of normal pollution, and it's not an accident either. Chevron, then Texaco, decided to systematically dump billions of gallons of cancer-causing oil waste into the Amazon as a way to keep production costs as low as possible. They thought they could get away with it. Our lawsuit, I and other lawyers represented the affected communities down there, was successful. There's a major judgment now, $9.5 billion against the company. But what's interesting is when I think about the Ecocide law, if the law had been in effect in the 1960s, when executives at the American company Texaco were deciding how to engineer their oil platforms in the Amazon rainforest, I think there's a very, very good chance much of this never would have happened, and thousands of lives that have been lost due to cancers and other oil-related diseases might have been saved. When an executive of an oil company actually has to calculate risk, and when they're drilling in a delicate ecosystem like the forest, if they assume that they will never be held personally liable or criminally liable or have to go to jail if they deliberately dump toxic waste, knowing that it might kill people, they assume that they'll never be held accountable. They're just going to go do it as a way to increase their profits and, again, to keep their costs as low as possible. If the Ecocide law had been in effect, I think the calculus that's going through their heads when they decide to make certain decisions about how to produce oil would have been completely different. And I think there would have been significant incentives for them not to dump, certainly not deliberately dump, this oil poison into the rivers and streams that people were relying on for their drinking water, for their bathing and their fishing, with all the resulting cancers and suffering and economic problems and death even from people being exposed to oil contamination. So I believe, as a human rights lawyer, as an environmental lawyer, as a lawyer who tries to help indigenous peoples in the forest, our frontline defenders, I believe the battle to make ecocide a law, to have it accepted as the 5th atrocity crime, is really the legal battle of our generation. And I think it requires a mass mobilization by citizens all over the world to convince their governments to back the idea of ecocide as an environmental crime. Because without it, I believe the major polluters, the big fossil fuel companies it's just their nature of their business, they're going to pollute if they can get away with it. I think they're going to have to think long and hard now. With the Ecocide law looming as being accepted as a 5th atrocity crime, they're going to have to think long and hard about their practices and how to make them cleaner. And that can help our planet and it can help save lives. So again, I think the Ecocide law, the implementation of it is critically important. I think it's the legal battle of our generation. And I think it's the responsibility of all of us, lawyers and non-lawyers alike, to do all we possibly can to build the kind of global movement that is necessary to make sure this law becomes reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen. Okay, so next up is, you can say the woman of the hour, Jojo Mehta. She is the co-founder of, she co-founded Stop Ecocide in 2017 alongside barrister and legal pioneer, the late Polly Higgins. The goal of Stop Ecocide is to support the establishment of ecocide as the 5th crime before the International Criminal Court. As executive director, Jojo has overseen a rapid growth of the movement. There are now Stop Ecocide teams or associates in 28 countries. That includes here in Sweden. And discussion of ecocide law is on public record in parliaments or governments in over 20 countries. Last year, Jojo was the convener of an independent expert panel that drafted a consensus legal definition for ecocide. Jojo, over to you.
Thank you so much. And it's a real, there's a poignancy and a privilege about being in Stockholm at this moment. And first of all, I would like to acknowledge that our associate group in Sweden actually predates us. There's been a collaboration there for many, many years. The poignancy really comes in that the first time ecocide was mentioned on the diplomatic stage, on the world diplomatic stage, was here in Stockholm 50 years ago in 1972 at the first UN conference on the human environment. And it was Olof Palme, then Prime Minister of Sweden, who described severe destruction of nature as ecocide and said it required urgent international attention. And it's poignant because it still requires urgent international attention. And actually, I read, for the first time, read the full text of the Stockholm Declaration recently. And it was deeply shocking, actually, because I almost had a bit of a sense of vertigo of kind of looking at these wonderful pronouncements of how we should look after the environment, about how human activity must take into consideration the natural world, and how even more relevant those words are now, and how the speech at the time, the speeches at the time, the text of that declaration talked about protecting the environment for future generations. I was born in 1972. I am that future generation. Many of us in this room are that future generation. Do we feel protected? Does the environment feel protected? I'm really not sure. And so, you know, there's a real poignancy to this conversation continuing now, and there's also a real relevance to the pressure mounting on states to consider criminalising ecocide. And it's because there's a missing foundational piece, and it's part of the picture. And shortly we'll be hearing from Ralph Chami, who brings in another part of the picture, which is deeply tied in, which is the economic aspect. Because in a way, because we failed in the past to put the hard stop of criminal law against the worst damages to the living world, what we allowed was free rein to the economic sphere, and within a certain attitude, if you like. And actually, when we look back at that declaration, we can see that the aspects of development have been followed to a certain extent, but the aspects of protection have not. And it seems like, you know, in our dominant global paradigm of thinking, which comes from the Western canon, you know, we are very deeply divided, both between ourselves and between ourselves and the natural world. And it was simply not perhaps considered important enough to put that criminal parameter in place at that time. But if we just spend a moment and thinking about what this world might look like now, had that parameter been put in place, I think we can see quite how powerful it could have been and still could be. But I think also what we need to realise is that we have a relatively short time in which to shift our frameworks. And criminalising ecocide, or the worst harms to ecosystems, can actually play a big part in that. Because when we put ecocide alongside genocide, what we're saying is that those things are equally important. And of course, as far as the intention goes, they're two different things. If you intend to destroy a people in whole or in part, you know, it's possibly the most evil thing that one can intend. And ecocide tends to happen in a different way. It tends to happen as collateral damage for a different aim. But when we look at the consequences, we really see we have a profound realization that actually it belongs alongside those most deadly harms for the whole of humanity. And there's a chance now, here at Stockholm to accelerate something that really is inevitable. And it's inevitable because sooner or later we will have to put something in place to prevent those worst harms. But as humanity, we have a bit of a tendency to kind of carry on in the groove that we're in. You know, psychologically, it's difficult for us to change our habits. We tend not to do it unless external circumstances force us to, or unless the rules change. And of course, we don't want to wait until external circumstances absolutely force us to do this. We want to accelerate that, and we want to be ahead of that curve, or at least try to catch up with it, so that we can actually prevent the worst harms going forward. But I think we also need to think about how we interact with, you know, our whole way of thinking has become based around economy and based around the markets. And it's all very well for us, and it's completely understandable that those of us that campaign for the environment and for the health of the natural living world are reluctant to engage with a system that we feel is destroying the very, you know, sawing off the branch we're sitting on. And yet we have such a short time to make a difference. And the dominant paradigm that we have has to be addressed directly. We all have to be working together because we're all on the same Titanic, if you like. And it's time to stop rearranging the deck chairs. It's time to realize that we may have different levels of cabin, but we are ultimately all going to go down together. And we have so much to learn from the way that the indigenous guardians of the most biodiverse regions of the world treat and understand their relationship with the natural world. And we have a responsibility to have our dominant paradigm, which is a market paradigm, to engage with that so that those things do not oppose each other, but actually start to move us in the right direction. And if they're going to do that, they're going to need that outer boundary framework. They're going to need that parameter. And I'm hoping that in the rest of this session, we can have a little bit more of a conversation about how those things can interact so that we can all move forward into a different way of thinking, because we have to. I don't want my children to be looking back in 50 years' time with that same sense of vertigo. I want them to be acknowledging that this was a time when we actually genuinely did work to protect our own species and all of the rest that we share this planet with. Thank you.
Thank you, Jojo. So we're going to go to our next panelist, and then we'll open this up for discussion. Up next is Ralph Chami. Ralph is an economist whose work has helped bridge the gap between economics and environmental science. He's currently on sabbatical from the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, where he is assistant director in the Institute for Capacity Development. Ralph is also the co-founder of Rebalance Earth, an organization that works with businesses to marshal funding towards projects that fight climate change and protect keystone species like forest elephants and whales. Ralph?
Thank you. I was trying to figure out where to come in on this conversation. I think somewhere around the Descartes' time, the Cartesian paradigm gave supremacy to the mind over the corporal body, and thereby divorced humans from their natural environment. That helped at a certain point for the next 300-400 years through the Industrial Revolution, where growth was, it was all about growth. At the time of Descartes and the Cartesian paradigm, you had writers, the Age of Enlightenment, if you like, who thought that we were endowed with nature that was infinite and with boundless commodities. And that's with respect to land, let alone for the ocean that we knew nothing about, we continue not to know anything about. So we got on with our business with impunity, polluting with impunity, extracting with impunity. After all, nature was free. Lo and behold, as we're discovering, nature is not free. And it's not boundless. And nature is the home where we live. The paradigm that I practiced, I was trained in, and I taught in, and I practiced as a professional economist for 30 years, has really a problem, a structural problem. It views the economy outside of nature. And there's this feeling that somehow we can replace nature with something else, that there's some kind of a trade-off. I can trade off away from nature towards technology. But anybody could tell you, you can't do without oxygen, you can't do without water, and you cannot do without soil. So we're not really separate from nature. Nature is our home. And if I were to jump to the end, I was raised by the Jesuits, and I remember Father Michael saying, who can tell me what is the story, what is behind the parable of the prodigal son? And all the kids in my class were raising their hands to talk about how wonderful the father was that accepted the son coming home. And I was not a very good student. I was in the back of the room, and I shook my head, and he said, what do you think? And I said, I have a completely different read of this. It's really about the son, because the father didn't phone the son and say, come home. It's the son that woke up one day, realized made a mistake, and came home. The father, being the loving father, he was there when the son left, and he would be there when the son comes home. But this is the story about the son realizing he made a mistake and came home, came home wiser and more humble. So, jumping to the end, we need to come home to the only home, as Carl Sagan used to say, we've ever known. And I'll say to the only home we'll ever know, which is Earth, our planet, while we still have time. Because time is not on our side. According to the IPCC report, the latest one is even more shocking than the one that just came out a few months before that, saying we have 3 years, 7 years maximum to undo the damage, if you like. And we still are talking about it. It's all talk, not much action. So what I do, that's why I took sabbatical from the IMF, is because I came to the point that I couldn't do my daily job and do this passion of mine, and I decided to put my money where my mouth is and go on and do what I believe in, which is there's a value to a living and thriving nature. And I can prove it to you. I'm a financial economist. I am not an environmental economist. We were taught to value nature from an extractive point of view, meaning if you look at a tree today and I tell you what is the value of this tree, the first thing comes to your mind is if you cut it down into timber, it has a value. But guess what? That tree, alive and well, has also a value. And that monetary value of that tree, not the intrinsic value only, it far exceeds the timber value. We value whales only when we kill them and chop them into pieces, and some countries still eat them. That fetches about 30,000. But guess what? The whales they provide a service to humanity. At least one service is worth $3 million, alive and well. Forest elephants, when they're poached, the tusk, if it's a trophy hunt, can fetch about 30,000. But a live elephant thriving, freely frolicking in nature, in the forest of the Congo Basin, just one service, carbon sequestration in the forest, fetches over $3 million. And it goes on and on. If you don't want to talk about species, we can talk about seagrass. Seagrass that you lose because people that go to resorts don't like their feet to touch seagrass. So you see people, the workers in the morning chopping seagrass. Would you like to know how much seagrass is worth? Just in carbon sequestration alone, globally, we just finished the report for UNEP, $2 trillion. Just in carbon sequestration alone. So nature, alive and well, not only is intrinsically valuable, but in terms of services to humanity, is incredibly valuable. Science is what is allowing us to say these things. We do the valuation, I only do the valuation to basically translate that knowledge in science to people like us in the policy circle so we can make decisions based on cost-benefit analysis. But we still need what Jojo has been talking about is the action, the policy action, the legal action to protect nature. And then we can create markets around a living and thriving nature. And those markets will bring everybody together because conservation has been a conversation among activists, scientists, policymakers, if you like. We, in the finance world, we were deemed the evil ones. So we've been outside this tent. We've been saying, we are also living on this Titanic. We need to be inside the tent together. So we need to come into this tent. But to come into this tent, you have to speak our language. If you aim to engage people in a positive way, you have to speak their language, not speak at them, speak with them. And there's a language for the markets that will bring them on board. And it's not about philanthropy. This is not about philanthropy because there are limits to philanthropy. That's why we're here, because there have been limits to philanthropy. And unfortunately, we can't take everybody back to being children and reteaching them ethics and morals. So we need to deal with the system as we have right now. And the system that we have right now has a lot of problems, but we do not have time to gut it completely. We need to do what we can, and I believe what we have is good enough to get us beyond the finish line. I'll stop here.
Well, thank you. So this sparks a lot of debate among the environmental community, your work. And you know, some environmentalists criticize the idea of natural capital. Well, first, let me stop there. Let's put a definition on natural capital, because it's a term that we used to describe your work in many ways. Can you describe sort of natural capital for us, and also where that fits in this concept of ESG, or environmental social governance, sort of that umbrella of things?
So natural capital is a terminology in economics, really, not even in finance. And we have physical capital, we have financial capital, we have human capital. And when you look at nature and the services of nature, we think of it as, the terminology that economists give is natural capital, which includes, by the way, flora and fauna. And of course, it should also include biodiversity, the interaction between flora and fauna. Now, the second part of this is the criticism of what is, you know, how natural capital is being used, if that's what you're referring to, in the sense that, well, if you believe that nature has, for example, think of New Zealand, they've conferred personhood on rivers. That means they have the same rights, and we have responsibilities toward a river, just like I have a responsibility towards you and you have towards me. So it's not really owned by anybody. That's personhood. Natural capital does not recognize that in that definition. So how are you going to square the two together? And I recognize that. But there are ways to bridge these two definitions together. And if I have time, I can elaborate on that. Certainly in the paradigm that my colleagues and I have been working on, it recognizes both the service value of nature along with its intrinsic value to a certain extent. Remember, we work for a company. I work for the IMF. I believe I have an intrinsic value. My mom may disagree. But the IMF pays me not because of my intrinsic value. The IMF pays me for a service that I provide. Correct? I think we all work for someone or for ourselves, and we extract the salary. That salary does not reflect your intrinsic value. That salary reflects the value of your product, we call it in economics, the value of the product, the marginal product that you provide, and you get a wage. So why should I accept the wage for myself and deny a wage to nature for the services that nature provides? You see? Nature is providing services. So why can't we pay back nature for its services and keep intrinsic value aside? Because I also have an intrinsic value the IMF does not recognize. That doesn't seem to bother me. But when I tell people we need to pay the elephants for their work, we need to pay the whales for their work, people say, but you're not valuing their intrinsic value. Yeah, but no one is valuing my intrinsic value either. And that doesn't seem to bother me. So why is it that we allow for themselves what we'd like to deny for our fellow creatures? So I'm not sure if I answered it correctly, but you know, I'm happy to elaborate.
Yeah. And we'll want you to. I want to sort of put something to Jojo. So with this concept of natural capital, say we've briefly talked about this, but if a forest is valued at $1 billion and a lithium mine that would destroy that forest is valued at $10 billion, what does Ecocide make a difference if that's in play?
I think there's actually a fundamental issue around the valuation of natural capital, and it's exactly why the two sides are absolutely necessary, and I think particularly why the criminal parameter is necessary, because if we have the sort of rule in place of, beyond this level of harm thou shalt not go, not only shall thou not go, but according to the consensus definition of ecocide that emerged last year, thou shalt not even threaten to go, then what that does is that starts to direct the economic questions in a new direction and allows them to more healthily interact with this possibility of valuing the services in a way that protects rather than commodifying. And I think that without the Ecocide law parameter in place, there is a real danger of those kinds of things arising. But I think with it in place, then there's the potential to actually, to start to sort of redirect the flow, because money is like water. It will flow in the direction of least resistance. And so if we can shift that flow, then actually the energy starts to flow in a new direction as well. The ideas start to flow in a new direction as well. And I think we're really seeing that at the moment with this level of frustration with the multilateral environmental agreements like Paris, like the CBD, or like the Stockholm Declaration. Ultimately, these are all wonderful words, but the action is not forthcoming at the level that it needs to be. And the big question is how? How are we going to implement all of this? And for us, at Stop Ecocide and the growing movement that's supporting this legal initiative, it is about the how. Here is a solution for the how. You put this parameter in place, and it creates the how.
So I always hate sort of trying to simplify things down because you lose so much nuance. But it seems what I'm hearing is that, these ideas behind the concept of ecocide, behind the rights of nature, these come from indigenous worldviews, things that Gert has worked on and brought to life. And Gert, I'd like to ask you, how, in your work, has there been frustration moving those ideas into the mainstream in the past? And also, is there, with your work, is there an uncomfortableness among folks you work with in looking at this in economic terms? I know that's more than one question, but I'd love any thoughts you have to share in that realm.
Yeah, it's always related to economic issues, and I've seen the hypocrisy of all that, because if we talk about Chief Rowney, when he started doing his work with Sting, they met with all the most important people of the times, and the people responded, "Okay, we're going to help." So in a way, they all agreed on doing the PPG-7, which was a very interesting thing. It was a cooperation to work on protecting the Brazilian Amazon, and it worked at a certain level. But during the same time, they didn't do nothing to stop the extractivism activities and the constructions of dams and all that, So we arrive at a point where this hypocrisy became a real problem, and I think the Bellomonte Dam, which started being constructed in 2011, showed that very concretely, and that was exactly at the point where we started talking about ecocide. It was not a coincidence at all, because, like I said, there's a certain point where you cannot go on being hypocrite. You have to and now that's the same way we're going to do the tour. So President Macron is helping Chief Rowney, but at the same time is supporting a multinational company that are doing a wrong job in the Amazon. So how can we deal with that? We have to arrive at a certain point which this ecocide crime would help as well. Because it has to be now. It's the point. It's the right moment. So and the President Macron is using that word ecocide, is starting. The first one that the first French president that started to use Ecocide was François Hollande. We met with him, with Chief Raoni at COP21, and he said, "I know that it's very important, but it's too early." Wow, too early. So he had this consciousness, and when he pronounced the word Ecocide, he said, "Wow." A head of state is starting to use that word. So they know, but they have to, we really have to push and continue the work. So I think that we are in the right direction. We have just a short time, like we said, 3 years, 7 years. But we hope that this tour that we're going to do, and I know that Ecocide will be involved, and Chief Raoni will be supporting that. We're going to push all this political authorities to do the right choices.
Yeah, yeah. And Christian, do we still have Stephen with us? Yeah. We do? Okay, okay. I'd like to bring Stephen in on one thing. So this number may be outdated, but it's as of July 1, 2020. There were at least 1,550 climate change related cases filed in 38 countries. And I mean, I'd love to get your perspective on that uptick in litigation. You personally know how hard it is to litigate these cases, right? It takes an enormous amount of funding, time, and effort. But there is an uptick. And I mean, does that start to change the calculus of companies or insurance companies? Because, I mean, it becomes a risk for them on that side. And I'd just love to get your thoughts around that.
Thank you, Katie. And by the way, thank you for your great journalism over the last year or two for Inside Climate News. You know, this requires an all of humanity response. We're in crisis, okay? Whether it's journalism, law, communications, education, consciousness, like it has to happen on every level simultaneously for us to get where we need to get in the time frame left. I think the law does serve a critical component. I think about it very differently, though, than when I got out of law school many years ago. You know, when I got out of law school, you're sort of trained like, oh, you can get stuff done through the law. You can help people through the law. And I think what I've learned is the law really very much reflects market forces and sort of economic power. And it's very difficult to create these changes, again, without, you know, sort of dynamics happening across every level. I do think, though, that the law, you know, can really serve as a catalyst. I mean, obviously, the Ecocide law is critically important. There's other changes in the legal framework that need to happen, in my view. I do think the uptick in litigation, and we were seeing this all over the world, but very much in the United States, where, you know, just as one example, municipalities, cities are suing the big oil companies over climate change and damages caused by climate change. And all of this is extremely important, I think, to changing the political dynamics and the economic dynamics. So it makes it much more difficult for the fossil fuel companies to continue along the destructive path. But I'll reiterate, I don't think the law alone is going to get the job done. It's going to take a whole of humanity response. Again, I do think raising the cost to these companies to continue along the path that they're on is going to help. But I will point out, and I don't mean to be Mr., you know, delivering depressing news here, but I mean, you know, since the war started in Ukraine, the fossil fuel industry is making more money than ever before. You know, they are consolidating it, particularly in the United States, locking in years and years of drilling that is going to be very destructive. So it's a process, it's fluid, you know, there's costs, there's benefits. We have to keep struggling. I do think raising the economic costs, the insurance costs for these companies to continue operating the way they are is absolutely vital. I will point out, governments have a critical role to play. And unfortunately in the United States, and I think it's reflective of me being locked up for so long, the fossil fuel industry has enormous power over our government. I would argue that the fossil fuel industry controls the US government, not the opposite. The US government does not control the fossil fuel industry. You know, so people are going to courts, they're doing litigation, they're doing all sorts of things that are helpful, but they happen in an environment where we have very little time. And, you know, those actions alone are just not going to get us to where we need to get to protect life in this world. So it requires a holistic analysis, which of course we can all learn from indigenous peoples about how to reorient our thinking. So our consciousness flows across multiple platforms at the same time and gets a little more connected to nature, you know, gets less acquisitive and more protective and more understanding of our humble role in this planet, you know. So yeah, those litigations are great. I'd like to see more of them, but you know, they need to be put into a proper context.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Stephen. So just want to put everyone on notice. If you have any questions for the panel, we'll open that up. I do want to get one more question. I'm a journalist. I can't help it. Ralph, for you, so natural capital, right? This is a way to provide information to companies, and when you can measure it, you have information, you can improve it. But it also can be profitable. And we were talking about this assumption that natural capital projects would have low rates of return and be long-term, that, you know, companies may not, or people may not want to invest. But you said no. So I wonder if you could talk about that.
So Kyoto and then Paris Accord created an insatiable demand for carbon reduction, sequestration. And what we did as a global society, we made commitments towards going carbon neutral, carbon zero, carbon negative by a certain date. Originally it was 2050, but that was predicated on taking measures at a certain point in time. Well, we didn't. We didn't take any measures. So that date is like a train coming at you. It's picking up speed in a nonlinear way. So it suddenly became 2040, and we still didn't take any measures. We kept talking about it, debating it, delaying it. Politics intervened as usual, interests. Now it's 2030 and IPCC, which is, if you think of the IPCC, this is the language of governments. And usually governments are very risk averse and they're very diplomatic in their wording. If the IPCC is telling us that we have less than 7 years, you can imagine the reality is much shorter. So that, from an economist point of view, from a financial point of view, that is what we consider the demand for carbon sequestration and reduction. And here I want to just segue a little bit. There's a great confusion out there between when we talk about carbon reduction and carbon sequestration. The two are not the same. One has to do with the flow. So there's a very nice diagram in one of the IPCC reports, which has a tub and has a tap. The tub is the sky, and the sky is full, brimming with carbon dioxide. That's the stock of carbon dioxide due to all the emissions that we continue to emit into the atmosphere. That tub is full. And then we have a tap, and that tap is draining more carbon dioxide into a tub that is full. So when people talk to me, because I hear words about greenwashing and all this stuff, and I say this is because it's bad policy. So you have a tap, and these are the emissions, what economists refer to as flow. So you have a flow of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Now today, suppose theoretically we can all agree to shut off all the valves. We're still going to bake to death because the tub is full. So setting emissions to zero, meaning shutting off the valve, what are you going to do with the tub? You still have to drain the tub. How are you going to drain the tub? Well, let's go back to the latest IPCC report. It says nature can do it for you at 40%. Not high-tech that we don't know anything about because we boys like to play with toys. You see? So we want high-tech solutions. Well, in front of you, as my colleague Dinah calls it, Earth Tech. And Earth is saying, I can help you if you help me. If you let me breathe, if you let me recuperate, if you help me restore, I can help you with at least 40% of what you need. So there's demand for carbon reduction and sequestration. Now, where would the supply come from? In order to have a market, you need demand, you need supply. You have the demand. Demand for the supply of services comes from nature. That's your 40%. But it's only 40%. That's why you see the price of carbon keeps going up and up and up. Because there's tremendous demand for dealing with the carbon, but there's not enough supply of services. Nature can only deliver what we know is about 40%. Now, that means there's a possibility of a market, because you still need the regulation. You still need the policy action. So how would the market work? Well, let me give you something concrete. We have a pilot project with Lee White in Gabon. Lee White is in town, I hear. It's Minister Lee White. And Gabon has 57,000 elephants. Actually, now they've discovered they have even more. 57,000 elephants. Those elephants help sequester carbon in the forest. Guess what we can do? We can sell their services without the elephants knowing. Not the elephants, never the elephants. Their services. It's like we're renting out their services, their carbon sequestration services. To whom? Well, to all these companies that made commitments to go carbon zero. So let's pick one, for example, Google. Google likes to be a good citizen of the world. Well, let's go to them and say, you need to offset your carbon footprint. Yes. How much? 100 tons a year. Great. I will assign 4 elephants to work on your behalf. We're gonna call them Ralph, Grace, Claude, and Charles. These are my siblings' names, so I can use them. All right? Now, this is not by tying the elephants. This is not by doing anything. This is by allowing the elephants to frolic freely in the forest. As they frolic freely, and we track them with satellite and other non-invasive technology, you get your carbon offset. But wait, it gets better. You get to put on your website that you are saving the elephants of Gabon. And because saving the elephants involves paying the rangers, and the money comes into the local communities, indigenous population, in terms of jobs, development projects that they need, be it housing, be it hospitals, you're helping to stabilize nature, therefore you're helping to stabilize communities on their land. How much is that worth to Google, you think? A lot more than carbon. So you're not selling carbon, really, to Google. You're telling Google, you are partnering with me in taking an equity stake in nature. Because that's what we need. We need to be equity holders in our nature. Because when you have something to gain, you have something to lose. That's why I'm not a big proponent of high-tech solution. Because high-tech solution, yet again, divorces us from nature, which is the essence of the problem, is the belief that we are separate from nature. So this is not a long-term profitable. That's incredibly profitable for Google, because they get to put on their website that they satisfy their carbon footprint, they hit their ESGs, and they hit their SDGs. So they get to tell their consumers what a great company they are. They get to tell their investors what a fantastic company they are. And last I heard, if my son is a litmus, is a canary in the mine, he says he would never work for companies that are involved in extractive services. And he's 22 years old, and I'm sure there are many, many others who feel the same. Okay, so you can attract talent, you can satisfy your investors, you can probably satisfy your regulators, because regulation is coming down the pike, asking you, what are you doing beyond just telling me how you're treating your workers and all that stuff. So Google gets the benefit. Let's see what nature benefits. By looking after the elephants, you're looking after forest, because it's really not about the elephants. It's really about biodiversity. The elephants interact with the trees, interact with the soil. Together, they form a forest. A forest is not about trees, as we discovered. It's not about planting trees. It's about the life within the forest. So by looking after the elephants, you're looking after the forest. The money comes in to look after the forest, the elephants in perpetuity. Now this is very important because every system has a carrying capacity. The elephants have up to a certain point in terms of carbon sequestration, but we are morally and ethically responsible for them. So the money would come in to create an endowment fund that look after them in retirement. So just like we look after people in retirement, we look after animals and nature in perpetuity. And the money, because it's going directly to the stewards of nature, these are the local and indigenous population, they get paid. It changes their relationship with nature, because in some countries, as I understood from Lee, that in Gabon, the people and the elephants are not good friends, because the elephants get hungry and they're coming into their land because we're encroaching on their land. So the money can go to compensate the farmer that is barely eking a living from subsistence farming in a land that was not meant to be farmed anyway, and changes the relationship, and the farmer gets to realize that this elephant is a source of sustainable income for me. You see? The relationship changes from this to this. What does the government of Gabon get out of it? They get, that money is coming in, part of it goes into their coffers, but money is coming in, it's alleviating poverty, and by alleviating poverty, you're expanding the tax base. So for the same level of taxes, they get more income into their coffers. They also get to save on whatever they were going to spend on looking after the forest, because the forest itself becomes a self-sustaining asset. So nature wins, local communities win, governments win, Google wins. There are no losers here. It's not about bringing money. You have to bring money by design. You design it to satisfy what you're interested in. And here's something I just want to say, since I'll abuse my time. I always hear this about what the markets, how come the markets? I say the markets are a mirror image of our true values. If you feel strongly about something, you would think you would exercise it through your choice of what you consume, what you invest in, who you hang out with, and who you vote for. If you don't do any of the above, why are you looking at the markets for your values? The markets are the mirror image. If you're not finding your values in the market, it's because you're not putting your money where your mouth is. Sorry to use the American expression. Markets are, we don't look, this is why I like what Jojo is doing, because he's saying, if you care, you criminalize. This is the value system. You see, this says, this is our values. And then guess what? You'd be amazed how the markets take that value system and create services around it. I'm working with the Chileans in the Gulf of Corcovado. They have new technology that can detect whales in the water in real time. In real time. So they have these buoys, very expensive buoys. They're positioning them in the water, and they can detect the type of whale. Imagine, not only just a whale. Is it the fin whale? Is it the humpback? Is it the sei whale? Is it the blue whale in real time? So that technology is a chip, sits in a buoy, and sends the information to a satellite. The satellite sends the information to a land center. The land center sends a text to the ship, says, in your way is a humpback. We can see you. There's a humpback. Now, we had that discussion about 5-6 months ago, and the Chileans thought they were done. So in the final meeting, the gentleman from the Navy was saying, we're done. And I said, no, sir, we're not done. Why aren't we done? I said, you telling the captain of the ship, there's a humpback in his way, right? He said, yeah. I said, do you think he's going to stop? Of course, because we can see him. I said, yes, but think of his perspective. He's saying, first of all, how do you stop a ship? It's not easy. How do you move its, how do you change its direction? It's incredibly costly. And he's going to be late in delivering his cargo. So he's doing cost-benefit analysis in his head. If I were to change direction, slow down, or do anything, I'm going to be late in delivering my product. I'm going to pay a penalty. Maybe I can get fired. But if I hit a whale, what's the penalty? And I asked them on screen, what is the penalty for hitting a whale in the Gulf of Corcovado in Chile? Guess what is the penalty? 0. So guess what the captain is going to do? He's going to hit the whale. I said, now, so technology doesn't solve your problem. To solve your problem, you have to do, similar to what Jojo is saying, if you hit a whale in my water, could be criminal, could put you in jail, could be financial. Now imagine, let's say it's financial, before we get to criminal. If you hit a whale in the water, the penalty is $3 million. Why? Because I actually did value their blue whales, their services of their blue whales. $3 million per blue whale, just in carbon sequestration. Now imagine what would happen next. The captain of the ship says, wait a minute. If I hit that, they can see me coming. If I hit that whale, the penalty is $3 million versus maybe 100,000 for being late. But that's just the beginning of the game. The next part is Lloyd's of London insures that ship. Because you were asking Stephen about insurance. Lloyd's of London insures a ship. What do you think Lloyd's is going to do? It's going to say, wait a minute. When we insured you, there was no asset in the water that you could damage. Because whales didn't exist. They had a value of 0. Now it's an asset in the water that the ship can damage. So come back here, my friend. We're going to put an addendum to the contract. If you hit that whale, you are on your own, you're not insured, or you're going to be insured at a much higher premium, and or you're going to install a device on your ship that would keep you away from the whale. This is how markets react to policy. You criminalize the markets, soutien, they complement the policy. And the economic agent, we don't want to penalize anybody. We don't send anybody to jail. We want to change people's behavior. We have so little time left. So what we want, we need the policy action. The markets realize, oh, the terrain has changed. So I'll provide different service now, such that I satisfy the policy. But if you don't have the policy, why are you looking at the markets?
Thank you, Ralph. That was, anyone else's ears sort of perk up. Okay, so we only have about 7 minutes left. Are there any questions from the audience?
I think that it's not really a question, but I think that it's an excellent idea, this natural capital, because as you mentioned already, the human capital, years ago when I studied juridics and I became a lawyer, so we had to study a little bit also the economics, but not too much. And then perhaps I myself, but especially some of my friends, they were interested between the Marxist thinking and the capitalist thinking, and that was very interesting. Then even those who didn't think to be the socialists, they said afterwards that how you can think that we can keep the society just washing each other's shirts or so. And I remember that was so late that in 1990s, and then nowadays nobody will make this question because IT has changed the thinking, because you don't think that IT is the pieces of the metal, but I think that it's the service what is in data. So I think that in that way we have now in much better situation. But in service side, the capital we are in service side is still, how could I say, lagging behind the material. During the pandemic, the COVID-19 now, so in all countries, including also the Nordic countries, so the women were the main labor force taking these attacks by the COVID. They were in health sector, they were social sector, they were in educational sector, and they are all quite lower paid, if not underpaid. And now when it's a question that what to do, that what is their value, in that way. We have strike in Finland, like across Finland, strike by the nurses, we have a strike by the teachers and preschool education teachers and so on. And it's interesting to see that what will happen now, whether we get the more value for the services. So social capital has also considered to be a certain value, especially the Nordic welfare societies. We see that this is the value. This is a very long now, the preface for my question. Because I was very interested at how you will manage that. A long time ago, or at least 10 years ago, when I tried to speak for the human rights and for the equality, and then my good friend from Australia, Kevin Rudd, was a prime minister at that time, and he said to me, haven't you noticed, Daria, that always when you start speaking about the human rights, especially for the gender rights, especially the male, they are starting to look at their mobile telephones. I said, yeah, I don't know what to do. And then he said to me, why don't you speak at how much the GDP in Nordic countries get higher when you achieve this equality? I thought, yeah, could be, yeah, but I think it's not the main issue. But then I changed my mind and I made it like Kevin said to me. And then I started to speak that it means so much in GDP. And then everybody goes, what did you say? Where you can see the statistics and data? So here we have the data on that. But then I became fed up with that because I think I didn't thought about the human rights because of the economical value. How you can avoid this kind of the mousetrap?
Beautifully said. No, but it's the, so the first thing is imagine, you know, that half of humanity is being undervalued. Now imagine, now we're talking about even the other creatures. So look how far we have to, in order to bring them all the way. So part of the job when I started doing this was to say, do you know? I had to start somewhere. Do you know? And then I had to do the value so that you said, why should you care? I didn't want to talk to the converts. What's the use of preaching to the converts? You want to preach to my guild, my guild.
Your language.
My language,
yes.
Exactly. And there I had to, and so I'm a market economist. I'm not an environmental economist. And there is what allowed me to speak that language because I have credibility with them. Yeah. And the technique there is to use the service, is to value the services. Let's say, for example, I started with the whales. The services for which markets already existed, for which prices exist. Rather than make up my price, because then the trader will hang up on me in 2 seconds. Because if I say, well, I think the price of a whale, because I surveyed 5,000 people and they told me the price of a whale, living whale, is this much. How many? 5,000? Hang up on you. So what we did, we looked at carbon sequestration, but that came from the science. That was already in the science. Okay. Now, how do you value a whale? It's not trivial. So I use the technique of valuing a share of stock. Value a share of stock that pays dividends, except that those dividends are alive. These are the baby whales. And they grow up to give birth to other dividends. And so what you're doing, you're valuing life, an asset that gives value over its lifetime. And what you do, and I'm only valuing one service of that asset. So, yeah, but and the litmus, I remember telling Dinah and my colleagues who were working with me, I said the litmus test would be whether the markets approach me. They approached me right away. I started getting VCs and investment bankers saying, "How do we invest in a whale?" Because and that was because that's what I was after. I was after talking to my guild, my creed. I was, why would I want to talk to conservationists and activists? They're already converted. So those guys start saying, how can we invest in a whale? And because and then they said, show me the technique. By the way, it was published last week in the Proceedings of National Academy of Sciences. Now you can see the whole technique, how it was done. So you build a population growth model, and then what you do, you impose on it evaluation. Basically, you're tracking the living system over its lifetime, and then you're discounting to the present. But your point is well taken. This is just the bare minimum. And in fact, I remember having conversation with Sir Partha Dasgupta's group in London, where the natural capital group, saying, but you left out so many other services. I said, yes, there'd be icing on the cake. Because if I can make the argument with the minimum, I was trained in mathematics, and this, you make the argument with the minimum, the other things, you just add them on top.
Yeah, when they don't.
Exactly. And if I can show you that the value of an elephant, just from carbon sequestration, is $2 million, for countries that suffered so much during COVID, when COVID came, all the countries that relied on tourism saw their tourist dollars disappear. This approach obviates the need for even having tourists come on board, because this is saying you're going to be paid for the services of your nature, whether tourists come or don't come. It obviates the need to rely on the tourism model, see? So from a country's perspective, such as Ecuador, for example, during COVID, Galapagos, the revenue into Galapagos went down, into other, to look at the Los Cedros forest, for example, and calculate what is the carbon value if the carbon of Los Cedros was sold, not Los Cedros. How much? And we've done that homework. That's a lot of money that they can get in on a regular basis without having to cut down their trees, without having to allow any mining inside the forest. For Lee White, because I'm trying to get hold of him this week, Lee White could make about $900 million a year from selling the carbon services of his elephants, without the elephants being aware of anything except they're frolicking around doing what nature wanted them to do, whether tourists come or don't come. So this is how you approach the valuation, and it's a market valuation. You are using prices of the markets, and you are using services that already priced in the market. Now, as with the whales, we did it a bit differently because we had also whale tourism. So we knew the ticket price for whale tourism. So we could track not only carbon sequestration in the whales, but tourist dollars. And then we also knew that whales had a positive impact on fishes. So we could add all three together. You add they're separately additive, so you can add them up. If you want even more astounding results, is seagrass. Seagrass in carbon sequestration is worth at least $2 trillion. Now, if seagrass turns out to be a great barrier against flooding, and we can value that service, it's another $2 trillion. Then the scientists in Australia, and I'll finish here, discovered that when you have seagrass, you have more fish. When you have healthy seagrass, you have healthy coral reefs. So we can look at the third source of cash flow, which is more seagrass, more fish. You add them all together. This is what is the value of a living and thriving nature versus an extractive nature.
I steal him for the human rights side.
So I hate to end it here. I was told we had to have a hard 11:30 stop, unfortunately, but maybe we could take this offline and continue, because I too. But thank you to our wonderful panel, Stephen in New York, too, or in the United States. I don't know where you are, but in the US. Thank you so much for getting up so early. To all of you guys, wonderful. Yeah, thank you.